Nobody saw this coming. Not the fans, not the fighters, and not even Blueface himself. When he stepped back into the ring after 3 years away, the expectation was clear. This would be a comeback story. People believed he would return stronger, sharper, and ready to prove that he wasn't just a rapper experimenting with boxing, but someone who could genuinely dominate inside the ring. The narrative was already written in his favor. A smooth return, a confident performance, and a reminder of the potential he had shown before. But within just a few minutes, that entire story collapsed. It all came down to one moment, one exchange that instantly went viral. A hit landed, he stumbled, and before anyone could fully process what was happening, he was sent flying out of the ring. From that second, everything changed. What made the situation even more intense was how quickly the internet reacted. Blueface claimed it was just a push, something minor that caused him to lose balance. But fans didn't accept that explanation. Clips spread across social media at lightning speed, with people slowing them down, zooming in, and analyzing every frame. The conclusion most viewers came to was harsh but clear. This wasn't a simple push. He had been rocked. That single moment flipped the entire energy of the fight. The confidence he walked in with seemed to disappear. And suddenly, the fighter who was expected to dominate looked like he was struggling just to stay in control. However, the real chaos didn't happen inside the ring. It happened right after the fight ended. Standing in front of the crowd, the cameras, and the event host, Blueface made a statement that shocked everyone watching. That one moment didn't just surprise the audience, it sparked a massive controversy. Suddenly, the conversation shifted from how he lost to whether the fight was even fair in the first place. Rappers, boxers, streamers, and millions of fans jumped into the debate almost instantly. The situation became bigger than just a fight. It became a question of legitimacy, preparation, and what really happened behind the scenes. And to understand why people reacted so strongly, you have to look at everything that led up to that moment. This wasn't supposed to be a random match. It was meant to be a statement. When Blueface announced his return, expectations were already high because he wasn't new to this environment. People remembered his previous fight, the knockout, the confidence, and the way he carried himself like he belonged in the ring. On top of that, his connection to elite-level boxing training, with names like Floyd Mayweather Jr. being mentioned, added even more credibility. So when he came back after 3 years, fans and analysts believed this would be an easy win, a warm-up fight to prepare him for something much bigger that was already being planned behind the scenes. But things started to change before the fight even began. Originally, he was supposed to face another rapper in what seemed like a balanced and logical matchup. However, reports suggested that the fight was canceled at the last minute due to concerns about his sparring performance. That alone raised questions, but the situation became even more complicated when he was matched against a completely different opponent, a streamer making their boxing debut. On paper, that sounded like an easier fight, but in reality, it turned out to be the opposite. The opponent may not have had experience, but they brought relentless pressure, something Blueface wasn't fully prepared to handle. Another major factor was his physical condition. The Blueface who stepped into the ring this time wasn't the same as before. He had moved up from a lean middleweight, around 157 pounds, to a heavyweight. That kind of transformation isn't simple. It's something professional fighters take years to adjust to. While the added weight might have increased his power, it also came at a cost. His speed wasn't the same, his conditioning had changed, and his overall control inside the ring seemed affected. This created a dangerous situation where his experience and confidence were still there, but his physical performance didn't fully match it. At the start of the fight, everything seemed to go according to plan. In the first round, he used his reach effectively, controlled the distance, and landed cleaner shots. He looked composed, technical, and experienced, exactly what everyone expected. For a moment, it felt like the narrative was still intact. But then the second round began, and everything shifted. The pressure from his opponent increased, forcing him into uncomfortable exchanges. His movements started to slow, his reactions weren't as sharp, and the control he had in the first round began to slip. Then came the moment that changed everything, the viral clip. A clean shot connected, he reacted, lost balance, and suddenly he was out of the ring. That moment didn't just impact the fight, it destroyed the entire story. Line that had been built around his return. What was supposed to be a dominant comeback turned into a shocking loss, followed by controversy and unanswered questions. From that point on, the conversation was no longer just about boxing. It was about what really went wrong, whether the fight was fair, and how something that seemed so predictable turned into something completely unexpected. This was the moment that changed everything. The exact moment where the entire fight shifted direction. What was supposed to be a routine win, a simple step forward in a carefully planned comeback, suddenly turned into a viral disaster that nobody could have predicted. It started when Blueface's opponent began to close the distance, stepping forward with confidence and applying pressure that hadn't been there in the first round. Instead of staying on the outside and controlling the pace, the fight moved into a much more dangerous range. The opponent started targeting the body, forcing exchanges, making it uncomfortable and slowly taking control of the rhythm. And then it happened, the moment that everyone is still talking about. That one exchange that sent Blueface into the ropes and then completely out of the ring. Officially, it wasn't counted as a knockdown, but unofficially, the internet had already made up its mind. To millions of viewers watching and replaying the clip, that wasn't just a slip or a push. It was a turning point that changed the entire fight. From that second on, nothing felt the same. Confidence turned into hesitation. Control turned into survival. The script flipped completely. The opponent began to take over, pushing forward relentlessly, forcing mistakes, trapping Blueface in corners and dictating the pace of the fight. What started as a controlled performance quickly turned into a struggle just to keep up. By the time the final round came, the goal had changed. It was no longer about winning, it was about lasting until the end. And despite everything, despite the pressure, the damage, and the shift in momentum, he didn't go down. He stayed on his feet, absorbed the shots, and finished the fight. But when the judges' scorecards were finally announced, that's when everything truly exploded. A unanimous decision. Clear, final, no debate, at least officially. And that's where the real story began. Because losing the fight was just the beginning. What happened next transformed this from a simple boxing match into a full-blown controversy that spread across the internet almost instantly. Instead of accepting the loss quietly, instead of walking away and promising to come back stronger, Blueface did something that shocked everyone watching. Standing right there in the ring, in front of the crowd, the cameras, and the man who hosted the entire event, Adin Ross, he made an accusation. And not just any accusation, but one that had the power to completely change how people viewed the entire event. Because now, the conversation wasn't just about losing anymore. It became about fairness, about whether the fight itself had been legitimate. The moment the decision was announced, everything should have ended. The fight was over, the winner had been declared, and the audience had already reacted. Normally, that's where the story fades out. But this time, that was only the beginning. Instead of walking away or giving the usual post-fight speech, Blueface stayed in the ring, right in front of the cameras, right next to Adin Ross. And when he was asked a simple, routine question, whether fans would see him back in the ring again, he didn't respond in a normal way. Instead, he said something that instantly changed everything. You know damn well you ain't going to lose your own money on your own fight card. The reaction wasn't laughter, it wasn't confusion, it was silence, because everyone understood exactly what he was implying. In that one line, he shifted the entire narrative. This was no longer just about a loss, it was an accusation, a serious one. He was suggesting that the fight, the outcome, maybe even the entire event wasn't as fair as it appeared, and he didn't stop there. He doubled down right there in the ring, saying he didn't agree with the unanimous decision, that the scoring didn't make sense, and that something about the result felt off. Later, on his own stream, he made his position even clearer, saying he would never fight on that platform again. That wasn't just emotion speaking, that was a statement. And with that, the situation escalated instantly, because accusing a promoter publicly of manipulating outcomes is not something small, it's explosive. Within minutes, the internet picked up on it. Clips of the exchange started spreading everywhere. Fans replayed the moment, analyzing every word, every tone, every expression. The focus shifted away from the fight itself and onto the allegation. But what made things even more intense was the response. Adin Ross didn't stay quiet. He responded immediately. Rick. HT there in real time, denying everything. He insisted he had no idea what Blueface was talking about, that nothing had been manipulated, nothing controlled, nothing altered. Now there were two completely different versions of the story, and the audience was left to decide who they believed. But the situation didn't stop there. As people began to look deeper into the event, more questions started to surface. It wasn't just Blueface's fight that people were talking about anymore. There were other fights on the same card that fans began to question. Close decisions, controversial scorecards, unexpected outcomes. Suddenly, Blueface's accusation didn't feel isolated. It felt like part of a larger pattern. Even more surprising, Adin Ross himself later admitted that some of the judging on the card had been questionable. That alone didn't prove anything, but it was enough to make people think twice. Because now the narrative shifted again. Was Blueface just reacting emotionally to a loss, or was he pointing out something that others were also beginning to notice? Inside the ring, the footage told one story. His opponent had clearly applied pressure, controlled the later rounds, and taken over the fight. But outside the ring, the conversation was turning into something much more complicated. Social media exploded with debates. Did he actually lose? Was the scoring fair? Did the judges get it wrong? And then another question entered the conversation, one that made everything even bigger. What was this fight supposed to be in the first place? This wasn't meant to be a high-stakes battle. It was supposed to be a tune-up fight, a warm-up, a confidence builder. Instead, it turned into a loss, and that raised an even bigger issue. If this was the easy fight, then what happens next? Because looming over everything was a much bigger event, a bigger opponent, a bigger stage, a fight that had already been announced, promoted, and had tickets selling. Now, everything about that upcoming fight was in question. Because if Blueface struggled here against a debut opponent, what would happen when he stepped into the ring with someone more experienced, more prepared, and more dangerous? Suddenly, that future fight didn't look like an opportunity anymore, it looked like a risk. And with that realization, the pressure began to build, not just from fans or critics, but from the entire industry watching closely. Blueface found himself in a position where every move mattered. Does he accept the loss and move forward? Does he continue pushing the accusation? Does he pull out of the next fight altogether? Every choice carried consequences. Perhaps the most dangerous part of all of this was what was happening behind the scenes. While fans argued online and clips continued to go viral, the relationship between Blueface and Adin Ross was deteriorating rapidly. Because once accusations like that are made publicly, they can't simply be taken back. They either get resolved or they escalate. And in this case, everything pointed toward escalation. Reports suggested that the relationship between the two had already broken down completely. No more collaboration, no more shared events, no more working together, just silence, tension, and distance. But the fallout didn't stop there. This moment didn't just affect the fight, it affected everything connected to it. His reputation took a hit, his upcoming match became uncertain. His standing in the influencer boxing world was suddenly questioned. And most importantly, the way people viewed him moving forward began to change. Because now this wasn't just about what happened inside the ring. It was about everything that came after, the reaction, the accusation, the controversy, and the unanswered questions that continued to grow. In the end, what started as a simple comeback fight turned into something much bigger, a viral moment, a divided audience, a controversy that blurred the line between competition and speculation, and a situation that, even after the final bell, refused to settle. Because sometimes it's not the fight itself that defines the story, it's everything that happens after. At this point, everything had changed for Blueface. He wasn't just the fighter who lost anymore. He had become the fighter who made a serious accusation in front of the entire world. And whether that accusation was true or not didn't even matter at first, because the impact of saying it publicly had already shifted everything. The moment those words left his mouth, the narrative was no longer under his control, and what happened next pushed the situation to an entirely different level. Because once the internet got involved, there was no stopping what came next. The reactions were immediate and they were brutal. Within minutes of the clips hitting social media, it was over. Not just the fight, not just the night, but any chance of controlling the story. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube turned in to battlegrounds. Everywhere you looked, people were talking about it. And the tone wasn't light or playful, it was ruthless. Major names started jumping in. Rappers, streamers, influencers, and even people with no real connection to boxing suddenly had something to say. Some mocked the loss, replaying the moment he was sent through the ropes again and again. Others turned it into memes within minutes, turning a serious moment into viral entertainment. But there was another side to the reaction as well, one that focused less on the loss and more on what he had said afterward. Because now the internet had two separate debates happening at the same time. On one side, people were clowning him, saying things like he got knocked out of the ring and still tried to blame the result, or that he was dominated after the first round and couldn't accept it. To them, it wasn't controversial, it was a reality check. But on the other side, there were people asking questions, real questions. Why were multiple fights on the same card being called controversial? Why did even the promoter later admit that some judging decisions were questionable? And just like that, the narrative split into two completely different directions. One side saw a clear loss, the other saw something that didn't fully add up. That divide only made things louder, because when the internet splits, the conversation doesn't slow down, it explodes. And then came another moment that pushed everything even further. This wasn't just fans anymore. This was professionals, fighters, people who actually understood boxing at a high level. And one name in particular stood out, Claressa Shields. When she spoke, people paid attention because she didn't react emotionally. She broke things down with logic. And what she said didn't help Blueface at all. She made a point that hit hard. Public figures need at least 6 months of serious training before stepping into real fights. The message behind that was clear. He wasn't ready. With that, the narrative shifted again. Now the focus wasn't just on whether the fight was fair. It became about preparation, discipline, the difference between being a celebrity and being an actual fighter. But what made her comments even more interesting was that she didn't completely dismiss him either. She admitted the fight was competitive. She said it wasn't completely one-sided, even though she still believed the opponent deserved the win. And that added a layer of complexity to the situation. Because now it wasn't black and white. It wasn't clearly a robbery, but it also wasn't a completely dominant loss. That gray area kept the debate alive. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, things were getting worse. This situation wasn't just affecting how people saw him, it was starting to affect his future. There was already a bigger fight lined up, a major event that had been announced and promoted. Tickets were being sold. Expectations were building. But now, everything about that fight was uncertain. Fans began asking whether it should even happen anymore, and there was no easy answer. Because if he went into that fight and lost again, it could destroy his credibility in boxing completely. But if he pulled out, it would look like he was avoiding the challenge. And in this industry, that's just as damaging. The pressure was building from every direction. Fans, critics, and even people within the industry were watching closely. And then another layer of drama surfaced, his own team. The people around him, the ones who were supposed to manage situations like this, suddenly became part of the story. Clips started circulating showing tension outside the event, arguments with security, signs of frustration even before the fight had started. And that led to another question. Was everything already off before he even stepped into the ring? Because if the environment was chaotic behind the scenes, it's possible that energy carried into the fight itself. But just when it seemed like things couldn't get more intense, another twist appeared from someone who already had history with him. NLE Choppa stepped into the conversation, and this wasn't random. There was already tension between them, a past that had never fully settled. And now, with Blueface coming off a loss, the timing couldn't have been worse. NLE Choppa didn't just comment, he challenged him publicly, called him out, told him to step into the ring. And just like that, the pressure doubled. Now it wasn't just about recovering from a loss. It was about defending his reputation against someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. And that's what makes this situation so complicated. Because this loss doesn't exist on its own. It's connected to everything else happening in his life. The rivalries, the controversies, the personal drama, all of it now tied to this one moment, this one fight, this one night that played out in front of millions of people in real time. And in today's world, that's all it takes. Oh. Knee clip, one moment, one narrative to change everything. Now, no matter what he does next, this moment follows him. The clip of him going through the ropes, the loss, the accusation, it's all part of his story now. And the most unpredictable part, we still don't know how it ends. Because if the reactions so far have been this intense, then what comes next could be even bigger. The internet doesn't forget, and right now, it's watching his every move. At this stage, this wasn't just a fight anymore. It wasn't even just about him losing. It had turned into a full-scale internet storm. The kind that pulls everyone in: fans, critics, fighters, influencers, and even people who don't normally follow boxing. Once those clips went viral, there was no escaping it. That moment, him being sent through the ropes, became the image people couldn't stop watching. It turned into memes, reactions, edits, and endless replays. Some fans didn't hold back at all. They pointed out that he had trained with elite fighters and still got overwhelmed by someone making their debut. Others called it a wake-up call, saying you can't blame the system when you were under pressure the entire fight. But at the same time, there were still people asking deeper questions. Why did multiple fights that night feel controversial? Why did even the host admit the judging looked off? Why did the scorecards feel so one-sided? And just like that, the debate shifted again. Now it wasn't just about skill, it was about trust. Trust in the judges, trust in the promotion, trust in what people were actually watching. And once that kind of doubt enters the conversation, it spreads quickly. But the reactions didn't stop with fans. Inside the industry, people started speaking, but not always directly. Subtle posts, cryptic messages, lines that didn't name anyone but clearly pointed at the situation. Some said that certain people step into the ring for attention, while others step in fully prepared. Others pointed out that you can't skip the process and expect the same results. And just like that, the tone shifted again. This wasn't just entertainment anymore. It became a lesson, a warning about what happens when preparation doesn't match expectation. And slowly, the conversation began to move beyond the fight itself and toward something more personal. His discipline, his focus, and the choices that led him to that moment. As the dust from the fight began to settle, the conversation didn't slow down, it evolved. People weren't just reacting to the loss anymore. They started digging deeper into Blueface's past, his time away from the sport, his lifestyle, and the choices he made leading up to that moment. And suddenly, the narrative shifted again. This wasn't being treated as just a bad night in the ring. It was being framed as a reflection of everything: his preparation, his discipline, and the way he approached the fight as a whole. Fans pointed out that he had been out of the ring for 3 years, came back noticeably heavier, and didn't look fully conditioned. Every detail was being analyzed, every flaw highlighted, and in today's world, that kind of attention doesn't fade quickly. Once the internet locks onto a moment like this, it stays there. At the same time, the boxing community approached things differently. Their reactions weren't driven by memes or emotions. They were technical, focused, and just as serious. Fighters and analysts began breaking down the match round by round. They talked about the weight difference, the pacing, the conditioning, and how momentum shifted as the fight progressed. They explained how pressure changed everything, how closing the distance disrupted Blueface's rhythm, and how the later rounds were controlled by his opponent. And the conclusion they reached wasn't dramatic, it was straightforward. He got outworked. Not completely outclassed, but outworked, outpressured, and outlasted. And hearing that from people who actually understand the sport hit differently. It wasn't about opinions anymore, it was about fundamentals. But even with that clarity, the controversy didn't disappear, because the accusation still hung in the air. Words like rigged, tampered, and unfair continued to circulate, and until those claims are addressed properly, they don't just go away. They linger. And that's exactly what started happening. Every time someone talked about the fight, they weren't just discussing the performance. They were questioning whether there was something else going on behind the scenes. That possibility, even without proof, was enough to keep the story alive. What made the situation even more intense was the silence. While the internet debated, while fans argued, and while analysts broke everything down, the people at the center of it all said very little. No detailed statements, no full explanations, no real follow-ups, just silence. And that kind of silence doesn't calm things down. It makes them worse. Because when there are no answers, people start creating their own. Rumors grow, stories shift, narratives evolve, and the truth becomes harder to find. That leads to the biggest question of all: why stay quiet? Is it strategy? Is it legal reasons? Or is it because there's more happening behind the scenes that hasn't come out yet? Whatever the reason, one thing is clear: this situation isn't over. In fact, it feels like it's still building. Because just when it seemed like everything had already been exposed, the story took another unexpected turn. While the internet was busy arguing and debating, a small detail started to circulate quietly. At first, it didn't get much attention. It wasn't loud or viral. But once people noticed it, it started changing how everything was viewed. According to multiple whispers, there may have been something off before the fight even started. Not in the ring, not during the rounds, but behind the scenes. This brought people back to earlier moments. The original fight being canceled, the opponent being switched at the last minute, the rushed feeling surrounding the entire event. At the time, those details raised questions, but now they were being re-examined. Some began to suggest that the replacement opponent, the streamer making his debut, wasn't as unprepared as people initially believed. That he had been training longer than expected, preparing quietly, studying, and getting ready for an opportunity like this. If that's true, then the situation looks very different. It stops being a last-minute matchup and starts looking like something more calculated. Now, to be clear, there's no official proof of that, no confirmed reports, but the timing raised eyebrows. How do you go from a canceled fight to a completely new opponent who then dominates the later rounds? That's the question people kept asking. And then came another twist. Attention shifted to the judging, not just in this fight, but across the entire event. There were multiple close decisions, controversial scorecards, and even comments from the promoter suggesting that some outcomes looked questionable. Suddenly, the accusation that was dismissed earlier started sounding different. Not proven, but not impossible either. Enough uncertainty to make people wonder if there was more beneath the surface. At the same time, one factor continued to stand out above everything else: the silence. Blueface hadn't provided a full explanation, no breakdown of what he meant, no detailed clarification, just that one moment in the ring, that one accusation, and then nothing. On the other side, there wasn't much more either: short denials, controlled responses, no deep dive into the claims. And when both sides stay quiet like that, it usually points to one of two things. Either everything has already been said, or there's something they're not ready to say yet. And it's that second possibility that makes people uneasy. Because if there really are details we haven't seen, if there really are conversations happening behind closed doors, then what we witnessed might only be part of the story. That uncertainty keeps the situation alive. And now, hanging over everything is one final question: the upcoming fight. The big one. The event that was supposed to define the next chapter of his boxing journey. Is it still happening? If it does go forward, it becomes one of the most watched fights for a completely different reason. Not just to see if he wins, but to see how he responds. Does he come back stronger, more focused, more disciplined? Or does this loss carry over into the next performance? Because in boxing, momentum matters. And right now, that momentum is gone. If he loses again, it's not just another defeat, it becomes a pattern, a label that sticks. But if he wins, everything changes again. The narrative flips. This moment becomes a setback instead of an ending. That's what makes this situation so intense. It's not finished. It's still unfolding in real time. Every decision from here matters. Every move is watched. Every word is analyzed. And the most unpredictable part is that we still don't know the full story. Because if even a fraction of the rumors are true, then what really happened that night might be very different from what we saw on camera. And if that's the case, then the biggest reveal might still be coming. So now the real question is, what happens next? Does the truth finally come out? Or does this become one of those stories that only gets deeper the more people dig into it? Because one thing is certain, this isn't over, not even close. And whatever comes next could be even bigger than the fight itself. Now it comes down to perspective. After everything, the fight, the viral moment, the accusation, the reactions, there's still no clear agreement. Some believe he simply lost and struggled to accept it. Others believe there may be something happening behind the scenes that hasn't been fully revealed yet. And that divide is what keeps this story alive. Even that one moment, the clip everyone keeps replaying, has become a debate of its own. Was it just a push? Or was it the exact second the fight turned against him? And beyond that, the bigger question remains. If the judging across the event really was questionable, does that change how the result should be viewed? Or does what happened inside the ring still tell the full story? These are the questions that haven't been answered yet. And until they are, this situation continues to grow. Because this isn't just about boxing anymore. It's about reputation, credibility, and what happens when everything plays out in front of millions of people in real time. One moment can define everything. One clip can change everything. And right now, that's exactly what's happening. So the debate continues. Was he robbed, or did he lose fair and square? Should he take a rematch and prove himself, or step away and reset completely? And what about that next fight? Is it still happening, or is it already in danger? Whatever the answers are, one thing is guaranteed. This story isn't finished. It's still evolving. And if anything new comes out, real proof, new footage, or an unexpected twist, it could completely change everything people think they know about what happened that night.